In the restless glow of a world shaped by restless ambition and the quiet hum of servers working through the night, the legends of the startup age rose not from glittering stages or immaculate boardrooms, but from cramped basements, borrowed desks, and the stubborn belief that a single idea, if carried far enough, could shift the entire axis of the world. And among these legends stood a constellation of visionaries whose stories intertwined across decades, each one a reminder that progress is rarely born from comfort and more often from the chaotic collision between doubt and determination. The first of these was Elijah Rhodes, a young engineer who grew up in Detroit, surrounded by the remnants of a fading industrial era where abandoned factories stood like rusted monuments to broken promises. And yet Elijah saw not decay, but potential, believing that the soul of innovation often hides inside the ruins of the old. He began sketching autonomous manufacturing systems in high school notebooks, lines of circuitry and motion paths drawn between algebra equations. And by the time he reached his sophomore year of college, his dorm room looked more like a robotics lab stitched together from thrift store motors and salvage conveyor belts than a place any human could comfortably live. His breakthrough came during a night when the power went out across campus. As the emergency lights flickered, Elijah realized that his prototype robot, rather than freezing like all others, was still shifting in tiny corrective motions, guided by an algorithm he had written that mimicked the adaptive instincts of insects. This became the seed of Helix Forge, the startup that would eventually revolutionize decentralized, self-healing manufacturing infrastructure, allowing small towns around the world to build local factories capable of repairing themselves without expensive industrial oversight. But as with all legends, the path was not linear. Elijah's first pitch was a disaster. Investors smirked, unimpressed by his unpolished enthusiasm and his wrinkled thrift store blazer. The robot he brought along for the demonstration malfunctioned, clattering onto the conference table in a way that sent coffee flying and confidence plummeting, and he walked out of that room convinced he had ruined everything. Yet on the train ride home, an elderly mechanic who had witnessed the debacle leaned across the aisle and told Elijah that genius often looks like chaos before it becomes clarity. And that simple sentence became the fuel for the next decade of his life. Meanwhile, across the ocean in Nairobi, another legend was quietly writing her own chapter. Zara Mwangi was a mathematician whose childhood fascination with patterns began when she realized that rainfall in her region followed rhythms that no one around her had ever noticed. And by the time she was 30, she had developed the predictive climate impact engine that formed the foundation of her startup Rainspire, a platform capable of forecasting agricultural shifts with unprecedented accuracy. Her work saved entire communities from crop failure. Yet Zara's true genius lay not in the algorithms themselves, but in her philosophy that technology means nothing if it does not serve the people who need it most. She insisted on designing interfaces simple enough that farmers who had never touched a computer could understand them, and she often walked through fields barefoot, listening to the soil, as if it could speak to her about the future it guarded. The world celebrated her as a savior of sustainable agriculture, but few knew the nights she spent fighting back tears in small internet cafes when funding dried up and one more failure threatened to bury her dreams. And then there was Marcus Beltran, the renegade storyteller of the digital age, a former street poet from Sao Paulo who realized that narrative was one of humanity's oldest technologies and who founded Pulseverse, a platform that allowed creators to encode their stories into living, adaptive digital experiences. Marcus believed that the future of art wasn't in static images or words, but in stories that evolved the longer a person interacted with them, growing like vines that intertwined with the user's emotions. Investors called him naive, dismissing his vision as an artist's fantasy. But Marcus refused to bend, and within 5 years, Pulseverse had become a cultural phenomenon, reshaping entertainment, psychology, and education all at once. But for all these legends, their paths eventually converged in a moment that would reshape the world. It happened at the Horizon Innovators Summit in Singapore, when Amelia Grant, founder of the ethically governed AI platform Mindframe, stepped onto the stage to warn the global tech community that the era of isolated invention was ending, and that the next chapter of the world would be written only through collaboration between visionary minds who who understood that technology, no matter how powerful, remained a tool guided by human intention. As Amelia spoke, her voice steady yet filled with urgency, a strange alignment unfolded in the audience. Elijah listening from the front row, Zara analyzing every implication of Amelia's predictions, Marcus sketching emotional pattern notes on his tablet. Their projects had never touched, yet their missions resonated like different instruments in the same symphony, and Amelia's speech became the gravitational center, pulling these innovators into orbit around one another. What none of them yet realized was that just beyond that summit's shimmering glass walls, a cascade of economic disruptions was already beginning, fueled by resource shortages, geopolitical fractures, and the accelerating pace of automation. And it was this looming crisis that would force the legends to unite, forming what history would later call the Vanguard Circle, a coalition of founders whose combined technologies would prevent a global collapse and usher the world into a new era. Although at that moment, as Amelia paused to take a breath, the audience caught in the tension between fear and hope. She had no way of knowing that within 72 hours, a system-wide failure would sweep across the global supply chain and trigger the sequence of events that would pull each of these visionaries into a storm so vast that even their brightest innovations would be pushed to the limits of what human ingenuity could endure. And as the lights dimmed and the audience rose in a standing ovation, Amelia felt an inexplicable chill crawl down her spine, as if the future itself were whispering that everything she had built was about to be tested in ways she could never have imagined. How quickly the fragile balance of the world could fracture when pressure built in places no one had been watching. And as dawn broke over the Pacific, casting thin bands of gold across the windows of her hotel room, Amelia awoke to a storm of alerts flooding her devices, notifications stacking faster than she could swipe them away, each headline more alarming than the last. As ports shut down, autonomous logistics fleets stalled mid-route, and production nodes around the globe blinked offline in a synchronized cascade that defied every model of probability she had ever studied, forcing her to confront the terrifying truth that the global infrastructure was unraveling far more rapidly than any single solution could contain. Elijah Rhodes, still half asleep in a taxi on his way to the airport, stared at the emergency reports as Helix Forge microfactories across 3 continents began failing simultaneously, their once self-correcting systems now spiraling into erratic behavior, as if an invisible hand had reached into the machinery and twisted the logic at its core. Zara Mwangi, standing barefoot in a field outside Nairobi, felt the earth beneath her shift with quiet unease as Rainspire's climate engine alarms warned of cascading agricultural disruptions, revealing that the supply chain collapse was already bleeding into the ecosystems her models had fought so hard to stabilize. Meanwhile, Marcus Beltran watched Pulse vs. Emotional Pattern Engines surge beyond safe thresholds, generating volatile interactive narratives that mirrored the rising global panic, and he understood with chilling clarity that even the realm of human emotion had become entangled in the spreading crisis. Within hours, the 4 visionaries were drawn together not by intention but necessity, convening through an encrypted emergency channel Amelia initiated, her voice tight with controlled urgency as she laid out a plan none of them would have dared consider under normal circumstances. To fuse their disparate technologies into a unified stabilizing system capable of anticipating and neutralizing cascading failures before they compounded into irreversible collapse. The proposal was met with a heavy silence, for each of them knew the risks, not only technical or ethical, but deeply personal, because integrating AI cognition with adaptive robotics, climate prediction engines, and emotional pattern architectures meant creating something unprecedented, something that hovered at the razor-thin boundary between salvation and catastrophe. Yet the world was already tipping, and hesitation was a luxury they no longer possessed. They agreed to rendezvous at an abandoned research complex in the Nevada desert, a place once meant for experimental aerospace prototypes, but now repurposed into a clandestine operations hub. When they arrived, the tension in the air felt electric, as if the entire planet were holding its breath. Elijah immediately set to work stabilizing the compromised manufacturing nodes using recoded adaptive logic. Zara infused the system with real-time environmental prognostics to predict ripple effects before they occurred. Marcus threaded emotional resonance protocols through the interface to maintain human trust during the turbulent transitions. and Amelia oversaw the integration, orchestrating the collision of their innovations into a new organism of technology they named the Lattice. For 48 sleepless hours, the four legends labored side by side, their disagreements sharp, but their focus unwavering, until at last, the Lattice hummed to life, a pulsing web of data streams, visualized as branching rivers of light flowing across an enormous holosphere. When deployed, it sent stabilizing directives across the global network, rerouting failing systems and recalibrating fractured infrastructures. Slowly, impossibly, the world began to steady. Ports reopened, fields recovered, factories healed, fear softened. And in the stillness that followed, as sunrise painted the desert in soft pinks and golds, Amelia, Elijah, Zara, and Marcus stood before the humming machine they had created, feeling the weight of a truth that settled over them like a final revelation, that no single visionary, no matter how brilliant, could reshape the world alone, and that the future would always belong to those who dared to build it together. It was in that shared silence that each of them understood the legacy they would leave, not as lone geniuses carved into history by their separate triumphs, but as partners who had turned a fractured world toward renewal, proving that innovation becomes unstoppable only when it is bound by purpose, trust, and the unshakable belief that humanity's greatest breakthroughs emerge not from isolation, but from the audacity to unite in the face of overwhelming darkness. And thus the tale of these startup legends closed upon the truth that their most extraordinary creation had not been the Lattice itself, but the undeniable lesson it etched into the future. That cooperation is the engine of survival, imagination, the compass of progress, and courage, the flame that keeps the world moving forward.